My plane did not leave until the following morning. I spent Tuesday night in the casino. The nugget is actually not as big as I thought at first, a trick of mirrors. And most of my time was passed at the aquarium bar, mulling over how I would spend my prize money. The musical entertainment came in the form of a well-oiled duo known as Bobby and Ricky, whose engagement is listed in nugget literature as indefinite. Bobby was a sax player with a genial smile. Ricky, a guitarist in a leisure suit with curly gray hair. When I arrived, Bobby was tying up the last few bars of Secret Agent Man. When the song was through, he grabbed the microphone and shouted, "Have some more tequila!" The mostly geriatric crowd responded with a lusty yell. I noticed a table of famous poets all wearing their medallions and drinking heavily. Bobby and Ricky started into Unchained Melody. Dancers crowded the floor. An elderly couple stood in the center, barely swaying, locked in a tender embrace. A man wearing a cowboy hat and a shirt patterned with the American flag asked one of the poets to dance. I knew her. She had bent my ear the night before, telling me all about her unhappy marriage that fell apart a few years back and the poetry that had helped her through it. Her first poem had come to her on her birthday at the exact hour of her birth. Smiling, she gazed up at the cowboy and laid her hand on his outstretched forearm. Some of us began to sing along with Bobby. The din of the slots died away. Out of the fake thatched roof descended Apollo, god of song. The waitress stood and watched, her tray full of tequila shots, limes, salt. The muse of the lyre visited Ricky, and he strummed a lovely chord. Time and loss seemed for us distant made-up things. At the center of the world were Bobby's lips, singing the immortal verses. And in these verses, we took our solace, and our hearts were gladdened. This was poetry. Thank you very much. It looks like we have a little bit of time left. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this book and its combination of fact and fiction. You just heard some of the fact. Maybe some of it seemed like I made it up, but I swear I didn't. This book began as a sort of a string of reported essays, similar to the one that I just read from, about places and people. Most of it is in the Southwest and in Mexico. That chapter takes place obviously in Reno. Those pieces are all true, and they all happened in the order in which they're presented in the book. Then I went back and I inserted fictional chapters in between them, sort of connecting the dots, as if these were almost like stepping stones on a path that needed, alternate stepping stones that needed that in-between stepping stone. And I created it out of thin air. Now, the thing that stays the constant as you go between these stepping stones is the voice of the narrator. And this is what really interests me, is this question of voice. To me, voice is at once the most identifying and also the most intangible aspect of any work of literature. But what is it made up of? It's more than just diction and rhythm and references. It includes assumptions that a narrator makes, things that might surprise a narrator, things that a narrator already knows, what he likes and he dislikes, who he wants to be. It's a total sense of where he is coming from. But the whole system of how it works, of how voice works, is based entirely on the assumptions that are made by a reader. So if a narrator is speaking in short clipped, sort of Hemingway sentences, then the reader will make certain assumptions. Maybe this guy's a tough guy or something like that. If the narrator is going to speak in long sentences, the reader will make other assumptions. If a narrator knows his way around a cheap motel or under the hood of a car, the narrator will believe certain things about him, and if he is comfortable in a five-star restaurant, the reader may get a different idea. And so voice creates all these interesting borderlines, I think, in nonfiction. The whole region in which voice is created is a region that's actually sort of between fact and fiction. If based on a nonfiction narrator's voice, choice of words, use of a thesaurus, a reader makes an assumption about that narrator that is untrue. Has that nonfiction narrator told a lie? When we read, we inevitably develop a relationship with our narrators. We may be bored with her. We may wonder why she chose a particular word. We might think she's a fool. We might be awed by her genius. but we have an idea about her, and we interact with that idea accordingly. The parameters are different for fictional narrators and for non-fictional narrators, but they always operate in the same way in that we develop an idea about this person who's speaking to us in our inner ear. More and more, though, it's becoming hard to know what kind of narrator we're dealing with. Our recent literary history has featured this fantastic outbreak of embellished or fraud, fake or embellished memoirs and fraudulent novels, including a very short list. I mean, it would sort of fill the rest of our half hour if I were to list all of them, but a short list would be The Education of Little Tree, Famous All Over Town, Forbidden Love, Misha, a memoir of the Holocaust years, Fragments, Memories of a Wartime Childhood, The Blood Runs Like a River Through My Dreams, and Love and Consequences, the last of which was actually recalled by its publisher like a faulty Prius. The most infamous, of course, of all these recent scandals were the two that both hit in 2006 regarding the autobiographer, or the memoirist James Fry, whose book A Million Little Pieces got all the press. He ended up on Oprah doing his mea culpa. And then the supposed autobiographical fictionist J.T. Leroy, slightly less well-known but also caused quite a splash in 2006. And both of those scandals, I think, point to nothing so much as the reading public's increasing desire to know what really happened in any book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Modern readers who are raised on pop psychology and reality television now make the assumption that, that literary fiction, though it is interpreted by the imagination, has its source always in the facts of the author's life. People say, well, you know, writers write what they know, so whatever I'm reading must be what the author knew. It must be, you know, a thinly veiled document that tells the truth about his life. This has given us a new genre, something kind of like the presumed memoir. And this is, in some ways, nothing new. Of course, autobiographical fiction has been around forever. Ask any fan of Mark Twain, or F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Henry Miller, Jack Kerouac, Philip Roth, Sylvia Plath, Saul Bellow, the list goes on and on. In fact, it includes pretty much everybody in American literature. But rarely has the focus been so firmly placed on the autobiographical element of books. In Leroy's case, J.T. Leroy's case, the reader believed that the author was a teenage boy so damaged by his past that he would only appear in public in an elaborate disguise. The relative success of his books, including The Heart is Deceitful Above All Things, which was a collection of stories, and Sarah, a novel, depended on the reader's presumption that what he was reading was thinly veiled memoir. Well, would these same works presented as fiction by an adult woman named Laura Albert, which is what the author's actual name was, have hit the same nerve? It's doubtful. The New York Times wrote about these books, an eyewitness imagination burns in Leroy's language, as vivid as a match held close to the face. And it's the key word there is eyewitness. Was the harrowing account of Leroy's hideous childhood of coerced truck stop prostitution the real draw here? Coerced truck stop prostitution. Could anything be more sensationally tawdry than what this author had supposedly gone through, and what the reader could access by reading these fictions? The satisfaction in this fiction was that it did not obscure too much the transfixing reality from which it had sprung. And now, of course, we know that there was no transfixing reality from which it had sprung, or at least the transfixing reality was very different from the one described in the books. The transfixing reality was this very elaborate hoax that had been perpetrated on the reading public. J.T. Leroy was the fictional creation of this woman I mentioned named Laura Albert, a musician who had also shanghaied her half-sister-in-law into playing the role of the reclusive teen in public. And it was a brilliant performance by both women that capitalized in a crass way on the American reading public's impulse to always reduce fiction into autobiography.